The restaurant shimmered under the golden glow of chandeliers, the kind of place where the air smelled like money and power, and laughter was delicate, rehearsed. Every table was filled with people in designer suits, whispering business deals over glasses of wine that cost more than most people's rent. But in the middle of that world, where luxury seemed infinite, stood Lena, a waitress in a simple black uniform with a faint stain on her sleeve and a tired smile that refused to fade. She wasn't supposed to stand out. She was supposed to blend into the background, until he noticed her. The man sitting at table 7 was Alexander von Hartmann, heir to one of Germany's biggest corporations, a billionaire by inheritance, charm by habit, and arrogance by choice. His presence alone drew attention, his tailored navy suit, his gold watch, and that smirk that suggested he'd never been told no. When Lena approached with a notepad, she caught his eye, not because she was extraordinary in appearance, but because she was too real for a place like that. "Guten Abend. What can I get for you tonight?" she asked politely, her accent soft and clear. Alexander turned to his friends and laughed quietly, switching to German as if to share a private joke. "Schau da. Dawson. Ein Kellnerin, die versucht, kultiviert zu klingen." "We sus," he said. "Look at that, a waitress trying to sound refined." "How cute," his friends chuckled. Lena froze for a moment. She understood every word. The sting burned deep, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she smiled, the kind of smile that hides storms. "Would you like me to recommend something?" she asked, pretending she hadn't heard him. Alexander leaned back, amused. "Sure," he said, this time in English, still smirking. "Surprise me." She nodded gently and walked away, but inside, her heart ached. It wasn't the first time someone had treated her like she was invisible, but tonight, something in her refused to stay small. As she prepared his order, her coworker, Marcus, noticed the tightness in her jaw. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I'm fine," she replied. Some people just think money makes them fluent in disrespect. When she returned with the meal, she placed the dish carefully before him. "Your surprise, sir," she said softly. He took one bite, his expression unreadable, then, surprisingly, he smiled. "This is, actually good. You didn't make it, did you?" "I did," she said simply. "I studied culinary arts before things changed." Her voice cracked slightly on those last words. He noticed, but before he could ask, her manager called her away. Hours later, as the restaurant emptied, Lena stayed behind to clean. She didn't notice Alexander still sitting there, watching her from afar. Something about her composure after his insult gnawed at him. He wasn't used to people staying calm after being humiliated. When she finally turned to leave, he spoke, in perfect German this time. "You understood me earlier, didn't you?" Lena stopped, then slowly faced him. Her eyes were tired, but her voice steady. "Every word." "Then why didn't you say something?" "Because dignity doesn't need to raise its voice," she replied quietly. "But thank you. You reminded me who I am, and who I'll never be again." And with that, she walked away, leaving him speechless for the first time in years. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. Something about her words echoed in his head. Who I'll never be again. What did she mean? He found himself thinking about that woman in the worn uniform who carried more grace in silence than he did in all his wealth. The next day, he returned, something he rarely did. But when he asked for her, he learned she had quit that very morning. Lena had decided it was time to stop surviving and start living. She packed her few belongings, bought a train ticket, and headed toward Berlin, the city where her dreams had died once, but where she hoped to revive them. Years ago, she'd been a rising culinary student with a scholarship, until her father's sudden death and her mother's illness forced her to drop everything to pay the bills. Working as a waitress wasn't her passion, but it kept her mother alive. Still, deep down, that fire hadn't died. Meanwhile, Alexander couldn't explain to himself why he cared. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe admiration. He found out the restaurant owner had kept a file of Lena's dishes, recipes she'd created for staff meals. He tasted one again, and for the first time, he realized, money couldn't buy heart. Months passed. Lena began working in a small cafe in Berlin, experimenting with her own recipes. Slowly, her food started attracting locals, then bloggers, then critics. Her dream began to breathe again, quietly, stubbornly. One evening, as she prepared for closing, a man in a dark coat walked in. She didn't notice him at first, but when she turned, she froze. Alexander stood there, holding a bouquet, not of roses, but of herbs, basil, thyme, and rosemary. I didn't come for dinner, he said softly. I came to apologize. She looked at him for a long moment, uncertain. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do, he said. I judged you without knowing your story. I mocked someone I could have learned from. She sighed, setting down a plate. Why are you really here? He smiled faintly. Because that night, when you said dignity doesn't need to raise its voice, it changed me. I started listening more. I started respecting more. You taught me something no business school ever could. Silence filled the cafe, thick with the weight of unspoken things. Lena finally spoke. People like you don't change overnight. Maybe not, he admitted. But I'm trying. And I'd like to help you, not out of pity, but respect. Your food deserves a stage. She hesitated, her heart torn between distrust and the quiet hope she'd buried for years. And if I say no? Then I'll still be your biggest fan, he said sincerely. For the first time, she smiled, not politely, but genuinely. 2 years later, Berlin's most talked about restaurant wasn't owned by a billionaire, it was co-founded by a waitress and the man who once mocked her. Their partnership became a story whispered through the culinary world, not about wealth, but about humility, forgiveness, and second chances. And every evening, as Lena greeted guests, she would glance at Alexander and remember the night he tried to belittle her, because that was the night she found her strength. The lesson was simple, but it echoed beyond their walls. Respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost you everything.